The room smelled of port wine and broken promises. I stood in the doorway of my uncle's study, not invited, never invited. But I had heard my name through the walls, and that was enough. 3 men sat around the desk. My uncle, Lord Henslow, red-faced and loose with drink. Mr. Crawton, a wool merchant with soft hands and a reputation that made servant girls cross the street. And a third man I did not recognize, older, thin-lipped, turning a coin between his fingers like he was pricing something. My uncle didn't see me. He was laughing. "Give her to anyone," he said, waving his glass. "I don't care who. She eats, she costs. She is her mother's debt in a living form, and I want her off my ledger by Michaelmas." My mother's debt. That was what I had become. Not a woman, not a niece. A figure in a column that refused to balance. Crawton leaned forward. "I'll take her. I've a house in Cheapside that wants a woman in it. She's pretty enough, and she won't have better offers, not with that name." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. My fingers found the door frame and held. And then, from the far corner of the room, from a wing chair I had assumed was empty, a man stood up. He was tall, dark-haired, dressed in a coat so perfectly cut it could only belong to someone who never thought about money because he had never needed to. He had been sitting so still in that shadowed corner that no one had marked his presence. Perhaps they had forgotten he was there at all. He looked directly at my uncle. Then he said my name. Miss Ellsworth. 2 words, quiet as a closing door. And every man in the room stopped breathing. "Miss Ellsworth will not be given to anyone," he said. "She will come under my protection. Tonight." I did not know his voice. I did not know his face. But I knew, the way you know when lightning is about to strike, not from the flash but from the silence before it, that this man had just bought my life. And I had no idea why. My uncle sputtered first.
"Ashworth, Your Grace, this is a private family matter." Your Grace, the Duke of Ashworth. Even I, half buried in my uncle's country house for 4 years, hidden from London and polite society like a stain on linen, knew that name. The 6th Duke of Ashworth, one of the largest estates in Hampshire. A man whose displeasure, I had heard, could empty a drawing room faster than a fire. And he was here, in my uncle's shabby study in Hertfordshire, on a Tuesday evening. Why? "It ceased to be private," the Duke said, "when you began conducting it with the door open." He turned to me then. I was not prepared for his eyes, grey, the colour of winter rivers, and so direct I felt as though I had been pinned to the wall. "Miss Ellsworth, have you belongings here?" I couldn't speak. My mouth was dry, my stays too tight, and the merchant Crawton was staring at me with an expression that made my skin want to leave my body. "A trunk," I managed. "One." "Have it brought down." He looked at my uncle. "I'll send a man for the accounts of her mother's debts tomorrow. You will not find the sum unreasonable. You will, however, find it final." And then he walked toward the door, toward me, and I realized I was standing in his path and could not make myself move. He stopped. Close. Closer than propriety allowed. I could smell wood smoke and something clean, like cold air. "You are not a ledger entry," he said, only to me, low enough that the room couldn't hear. "Whatever you have been told." Then he was past me, boots sharp on the hall floor, calling for his carriage. And I stood in that doorway with my heart hammering against my ribs, thinking,
I have just been rescued by a man I have never met, and I have no idea what the price will be. The carriage ride to Ashworth Park took 3 hours. We did not speak for the first 2. He sat across from me, one leg crossed over the other, watching the dark countryside pass. I sat with my single trunk at my feet, and my hands knotted in my lap,
trying to understand the shape of the cage I had just entered.
because it was a cage. It had to be. No one intervened like that, publicly, expensively, irreversibly, without wanting something. "You're trying to calculate it," he said without looking at me. "The cost. What I'll ask." I said nothing. He was right, and I would not give him the satisfaction of confirming it. "Your mother was Catherine Ellsworth, née Waverley." My breath caught. He did look at me then. "She was a friend of my mother's," he said, "before my mother died. They corresponded for years. When your mother fell ill and your father's debts consumed the estate, my mother intended to intervene. She did not live long enough to do so." He paused. In the carriage lamplight, something crossed his face. Not softness exactly. Something heavier. "I found the letters 6 months ago, in my mother's writing desk. Your mother's letters to mine, and my mother's unsent replies, including one that detailed her plan to bring you to Ashworth Park as her ward, to see you educated and presented properly." The breath I had been holding came out like a small, ruined thing. "You are here," he said, "because my mother asked, and I failed to find that letter soon enough." I pressed my thumbnail into my palm, hard enough to feel the crescent form. I would not cry. Not in front of him. Not in a moving carriage where there was nowhere to hide. "I am not a project, Your Grace." Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile, an acknowledgement. "No," he said, "you are not. But you are, at present, a woman with no legal protection, no income, and an uncle who was 2 glasses away from selling you to a wool merchant. If you have a better option than Ashworth Park, I am listening." I did not, and he knew it. And the worst part, the truly unforgivable part, was that he said it without cruelty, just fact, clean and surgical and unanswerable. I turned my face to the window and watched the dark fields blur.
"One trunk," he said, quieter now. "We will remedy that." Ashworth Park was enormous and very cold. Not the temperature. The fires were lit, the rooms prepared, as though he had planned this before he ever sat in my uncle's study. But the house itself had the particular chill of a place that had been grand once and was now merely large. Portraits watched from the walls. Dust had been recently cleared but not conquered. The great hall echoed. The housekeeper, Mrs. Yardley, showed me to a guest room in the east wing that was larger than every room I had occupied at my uncle's house combined. The sheets were clean. The curtains were blue silk, faded at the folds. "His Grace keeps a quiet household," Mrs. Yardley said. It was clearly a warning. "I am not noisy," I said. She studied me with the shrewd assessment of a woman who had been managing a bachelor duke's estate and had learned to be suspicious of any female crossing the threshold. "Breakfast is at 8. His Grace does not take company at meals, but a tray will be brought to you." A tray. In my room. So I was here, but I was not here. Present but unseen. A duty fulfilled at arm's length. I sat on the edge of the bed after she left and looked at the faded blue curtains and thought, this is better than Crawton. This is better than my uncle's house. This is a roof and a door that locks, and sheets that are clean. But my hands were shaking, and I could not make them stop. I did not see the Duke for 3 days. I learned the house instead. The music room, with a pianoforte whose keys stuck at middle C. The morning room, where sun pooled on bare floorboards and a vase sat empty on the mantel. Not forgotten, I thought, but deliberately unfilled, as though someone had once kept flowers there and the absence was the point. The library, vast and disorganized, where someone had begun cataloguing the collection and abandoned the effort halfway through. Books stacked in towers on the floor, a ledger open on the desk with entries in a sharp, impatient hand. His hand, I assumed. I picked up where the ledger left off because I had nothing else to do, and because disorder made my teeth itch. On the 4th morning, he appeared in the library doorway while I was shelving a set of Montesquieu. "You reorganized the philosophy section," he said. "It was organized by the color of the binding. That is not a system. That is a decorating choice." That flicker again, the almost smile that never fully arrived. "My mother arranged them that way. She said it was more beautiful." I felt the blood leave my face. I had dismantled a dead woman's shelving. The dead woman whose letters were the only reason I was alive and fed, and not in Cheapside. "I'm sorry." "Don't be." He stepped into the room. She was wrong. It was atrocious. He picked up a volume I had set aside. Voltaire, The Spine Cracked. "She would have liked you for doing it." She had no patience for people who agreed with her. He was closer now. The library was not small, but he occupied space in a way that made rooms feel smaller. He reached past me to place the Voltaire on a higher shelf, and for a moment, his arm was near enough that I could see the weave of his coat sleeve and feel the warmth that came off him like a banked fire. I stepped back. He noticed. He did not comment. "You are not eating," he said. "I am eating." "Mrs. Yardley reports that your trays return half-touched." Mrs. Yardley should concern herself with the moth damage in the east wing curtains, which I assume she has not reported to you. The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut glass. And then, unbelievably, he laughed. Not loudly, a low, surprised sound, as though his own amusement caught him off guard. As though he had not expected to laugh in this room, or perhaps in any room, for a very long time. "You will dine with me this evening," he said. It was not a question. "I understood from Mrs. Yardley that you do not take company at meals." "I did not. I have revised my position." He turned to leave, then paused. "Wear whatever you like. We do not dress for dinner. There is no one to dress for." He left. I stood in the library with Montesquieu in my hand and my pulse doing something unreasonable. And I thought, that is not true. There is you. But that dinner, that first dinner, is not where the story turns. What happened before dinner is. I was crossing the upstairs corridor toward my room when I passed his study door, which stood open a hand's width. I did not mean to look. I looked. He was standing at the window, his back to the door, and he was holding a letter. Not reading it, holding it against his chest, the way I had seen my mother hold things that hurt too much to look at, but could not be put down. His shoulders were bowed. Not dramatically, not performatively. Just bent. The way a man's shoulders bend when he has been carrying something too heavy for too long, and there is no one in the room to see him set it down. I stepped back from the door. My shoe caught the floorboard and it creaked. He turned.
Our eyes met through the gap, and for one unguarded second, before the mask came back, I saw what was underneath. Not coldness, not authority, not the carefully maintained fortress of a duke who answered to no one. Grief, raw and bright and startled, like an animal flushed from cover. He closed the door. I went to my room and sat on the bed and pressed my hands flat on my knees until they stopped shaking. And I thought, he is not rescuing me. He is rescuing his mother's wish, because he could not rescue his mother. And it is breaking him to do it. That was when I understood the real danger I was in. Not the danger of Crawton, or my uncle, or scandal. The danger of caring about someone who had made a fortress of his loneliness and would not thank me for noticing. Dinner was a catastrophe of the most exquisite kind.
We sat at a table built for 20, facing each other across an absurd distance, and the formality of it, footman, silver, 5 courses for 2 people, should have been ridiculous. It was. And it was also somehow the most intimate meal I had ever eaten. He asked about my education. I told him. Governess until 12, then my mother's illness, then nothing. Self-taught from whatever books I could find. Which books? He asked. Whatever my uncle had not sold. Locke, Fielding, some Wollstonecraft, though he did not know he owned it. And your opinion of Wollstonecraft? That she was right about nearly everything, and her only real failing was dying before she could finish being right. He set down his fork. You cannot mean the vindication entirely. Her argument about female education collapses the distinction between... It does not collapse the distinction. It exposes the distinction as artificial. That is the same claim dressed in different language. It is not. And the fact that you think so proves her point rather neatly. The footman stood motionless while we argued about the rights of women across 3 courses and 2 centuries of philosophy. At some point, I realized I was not performing deference or gratitude or any of the careful masks I had worn at my uncle's house. I was just talking. And he was listening. Not politely, not indulgently, but the way one listens to an opponent whose next move cannot be predicted. You should have been at university, he said over the sweet course. Women are not permitted at university, Your Grace. That is the problem I was identifying. He set down his glass. You are wasted in a guest room reading my dead mother's mishelved books. What would you have me do? The question landed differently than I intended. Heavier. His eyes held mine across that ridiculous expanse of table, and for a moment, the room contracted to the space between us, and every candle in the room felt like too much light. I have not decided, he said, and then, lower. That is becoming a problem. I did not ask what he meant. I was afraid I knew. The weeks turned. May became June. The gardens at Ashworth Park, which had been neglected into a state of beautiful disorder, became my occupation. I was not a gardener, but I understood the principle. You cut back what is dead to make room for what might grow. I cut back a great deal. The Duke watched from his study window. I pretended not to notice. We had fallen into a routine that was neither friendship nor courtship, nor any arrangement I could name. Dinner together every evening, the library in the mornings, where we read in parallel silence that felt strangely louder than conversation. Occasional walks along the south border, where he spoke about the estate, and I asked questions that revealed, slowly, like pulling threads from a hem, the shape of a man who had inherited too much, too young, and had been hollowing himself out to carry it ever since.
His father, I had learned, had been a spendthrift and a tyrant. The estate was solvent now only because the Duke had spent 7 years rebuilding it, with the grim focus of a man fortifying a city under siege. His mother had died when he was 22. He had no siblings, no close friends, no one who called him by his Christian name, Edmund. I learned it from a letter his mother had written, one of the unsent ones, which he had given me to read because they contained my mother's words, and my mother's words were the only inheritance I had left. Edmund is too serious, his mother had written. He carries the house as though it were penance rather than home. I wish he would let someone in before the walls grow so thick no one can reach him. I read that line sitting in the garden I had been cutting back, and I pressed the letter to my chest and closed my eyes against the afternoon sun, and I thought, I am inside the walls. I don't know how I got here. I don't know how to leave, and I was not sure I wanted to. The evening that changed everything, or rather, the evening that made it impossible to pretend nothing had changed, was a Tuesday in the 3rd week of June. It began with rain, not the gentle English mist I had grown used to, but a hard, sudden downpour that turned the gravel paths to rivers and caught me in the garden without a coat. I ran for the nearest door, the side entrance to the conservatory, and found it locked. I was drenched. My dress was ruined. My hair was plastered to my neck. I was hammering on the glass with both hands when the door opened from the inside, and I nearly fell straight into the Duke of Ashworth's chest. He caught me, both hands, my arms, steadying me. And then he did not let go. We stood there, his hands on my arms, the rain hammering the glass behind me, water running down my face and dripping onto his waistcoat. I was close enough to see the exact shade of grey in his eyes, lighter at the edges, darker near the centre, like a sky deciding whether to storm. "You are soaked through," he said. His voice was strange, rough at the bottom, as though the words were scraping past something he had not meant to say. "An astute observation, Your Grace. You will catch your death. I am not so easily killed." His thumb moved, one small, involuntary motion against the inside of my arm, just above the elbow, where the wet fabric of my sleeve had gone thin enough to feel like nothing at all. I felt it in my spine, in my ribs, in the place behind my breastbone where I had been keeping every feeling I was not allowed to have about this man in this house. His eyes dropped to my mouth, just for a second. Then he released me so abruptly I stumbled. "Mrs. Yardley will draw you a bath," he said, and he was already turning away, already rebuilding the wall I had watched crack. And his voice was perfectly steady, and his hands were not. I watched him go. I stood in the conservatory in a puddle of rainwater, with my arms still burning where he had held them. And I thought, we cannot keep doing this. Something is going to break. What I did not know, what I would not learn until it was nearly too late, was that something already had. The letter arrived 2 days later. Not for me, for him. Delivered by a rider from London who waited in the kitchen for a reply that never came. I knew something was wrong because he did not appear for dinner. The first time in 3 weeks. Mrs. Yardley served my meal in silence and would not meet my eye. And when I asked where his Grace was, she said only, "Occupied, miss," in a voice that closed the subject like a coffin lid. I found him in the library at midnight. He was sitting in the dark. No candles, no fire, just the moonlight through the tall windows and the smell of brandy and the sound of his breathing, which was not quite steady. "You should not be here," he said. He did not look up. "Neither should you, not in the dark, not like this." Silence. I heard the glass clink against the side table. What was in the letter? I asked. A warning. He paused. From my aunt, Lady Ashworth. It seems the county has noticed your presence here, unaccompanied, under my roof, for 3 weeks. My stomach dropped. She has written to 4 families, he continued, his voice flat and careful, informing them that I am harboring a woman of no family, no fortune, and no chaperone, and that any household that receives me socially is endorsing the arrangement. She has also written to the Bishop of Winchester, who is an old friend of my father's and has never liked me. I sank into the chair across from him. The moonlight caught the side of his face, and I could see the muscle working in his jaw. She wants me gone, I said. She wants you destroyed. There is a difference. If you simply left, the damage would follow you. She is ensuring that wherever you go, the story arrives first. Why? She has never met me. Because I have never done anything she could not control. Until now. He looked at me then. In the dark, his eyes were black. I have put you in danger. Not Crawton's kind. The kind that comes from drawing rooms and writing desks, and women who have never been refused. My aunt will not stop. She views this house as her inheritance, my name as her property, and you as a threat to both. I am not a threat. You are. His voice was barely a sound. You are the most dangerous thing that has ever entered this house. And I did not see it until it was too late. The words hung between us. He had not meant to say them. I could see it in the way his breath caught, the way his hand tightened on the arm of the chair. He had said too much. In the language of his world, he had said everything. I stood up. I should have left. Every rule of the world I lived in said to leave, to go upstairs, to pack my trunk, to remove myself before his aunt's letters did it for me. Instead, I walked to his chair. I stood in front of him, close enough that my skirt brushed his knee. Then send me away, I said. If I am so dangerous, send me away tonight. Write to your aunt and tell her it is done. He looked up at me. The moonlight fell across both of us now, and I could see his face clearly. Every line, every shadow, the terrible precision of a man who had controlled everything in his life, except this. I cannot, he said. Why? Because I would rather have my name ruined than spend another evening in this house without you in it. And I have known that for longer than I am willing to admit. And it terrifies me. And I do not know what to do about it, and I am asking you to leave this room before I say something that neither of us can take back. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I did not leave. Then say it, I whispered. He reached up. His hand found mine in the dark. He held it, not gently, tightly. The way you hold something you are afraid will be taken from you. Eliza. My name. My Christian name, spoken for the first time. And it went through me like a blade wrapped in velvet. And I felt my eyes burn and my breath catch, and every wall I had built since my mother died shudder on its foundations. I am in love with you, he said, and I have no right to be, and I do not care. I opened my mouth. I do not know what I would have said. Something true, something that would have changed everything. But I never got the chance. Because the library door opened, and Mrs. Yardley stood in the doorway with a candle. And behind her, still in his travelling coat, mud on his boots and triumph on his face, stood Mr. Crawton. "Forgive the intrusion, Your Grace," Crawton said, stepping past Mrs. Yardley with the ease of a man who had practiced this entrance. "I did knock, several times. Your housekeeper was good enough to let me in when I explained the urgency." Mrs. Yardley's face was white. "He said he had legal business, Your Grace. I did not think—" "Leave us, Mrs. Yardley," the Duke said. He had released my hand the instant the door opened. He was standing now, and the man who had been raw and unguarded 30 seconds ago was gone. In his place was something colder, something with edges. Crawton looked at me, at the Duke, at the dark room, the brandy glass, the two of us alone at midnight. And he smiled, the way a man smiles when he has found exactly what he came looking for. "Well," he said, "this simplifies things." He reached into his coat and produced a document. He laid it on the library table with the care of a man placing a winning card. "A signed agreement," Crawton said. "Your uncle's signature, Miss Ellsworth. Transferring guardianship to me, in exchange for settlement of debts in the amount of £400. Signed and dated 3 days before His Grace's intervention." I looked at it. My uncle's handwriting, loose and careless. A date. Crawton had purchased me before the Duke ever arrived. I had been sold, and I hadn't even known. My hands went cold. My vision narrowed to a bright, terrible point. "And now," Crawton continued, turning to the Duke, "I find her here, alone with you, at midnight, in the dark." He paused to let the image settle. "The whole county will know by Friday. Lady Ashworth has already seen to the broader strokes. I am merely filling in the details." My aunt. His aunt. Working with Crawton. I saw it now. The full shape of the trap. Lady Ashworth's letters had not been mere disapproval. They had been preparation. She had been driving the scandal from above, while Crawton moved in from below, and they had timed it to the moment when the damage would be complete, and the evidence undeniable. The Duke picked up the document, read it. His face revealed nothing. "This is a guardianship transfer for a minor," he said. "Miss Ellsworth was under 21 when it was signed. Miss Ellsworth is 22. The Duke set the paper down. "She turned 22 in March. I know this because my mother's letter recorded the date of her birth. This document is void. You have purchased nothing." Crawton's smile curdled. "That can be contested." "It cannot." The Duke's voice was quiet now, and the quiet was worse than shouting. "The document specifies guardianship of a minor. Miss Ellsworth is of legal age. Your solicitor should have told you. I suspect he did, and you chose not to listen. She has no income, no family of standing, no prospects." Crawton's eyes found me again, and there was something in them that made the room feel smaller and darker and less safe. "You've already ruined her, Your Grace. Midnight. Alone. No chaperone. All I'm offering is to make an honest woman of what's left." The silence that followed was the loudest sound I have ever heard. I felt it. The trap's second jaw. He was right about the optics. I had been here for weeks with no companion, no social cover. And now, midnight. The dark library, Crawton as witness. In the eyes of the world, I was already destroyed. He wasn't offering marriage. He was offering the only door that hadn't been nailed shut. I looked at the Duke. His jaw was set. A muscle worked in his cheek. He was furious. But beneath the fury, I saw it. The flash of horror. Because he hadn't thought of it. He had been so focused on doing what was right that he had not considered what it looked like from the outside. And now, Crawton was using his decency as a weapon against him. I stepped forward. "Mr. Crawton." He turned to me with the indulgent expression of a man who expects a woman to plead. "You say you have purchased me," I said. "That document says otherwise. You say I am ruined. Perhaps I am. But I would rather be ruined in a library with Montesquieu and a man who has never once made me feel like a line in a ledger than respectable in your house in Cheapside. And if the whole of England agrees with you, if every drawing room and every church pew and every gossip sheet in London agrees with you, then the whole of England may go to the devil, because I will not." The room held its breath. Crawton's face went a mottled, ugly red. He took a step toward me. Just one step, but it was the step of a man accustomed to making women flinch. I did not flinch. I had flinched at my uncle's house for 4 years. I was finished. The Duke moved. Not dramatically. He simply stepped between us. And suddenly, Crawton was facing 6 feet and 2 inches of the highest-ranking man in the county. And the calculation in his small eyes shifted from anger to survival. "You will leave my house," the Duke said. "You will not return. You will not write. You will not speak Miss Ellsworth's name in any room, public or private. If I hear that you have, I will ensure that every creditor you owe, and I have had them investigated, Mr. Crawton, all 9 of them, receives their accounts by morning post. You are, I believe, already 2 quarters behind on 3 of them. A 4th default would trigger a petition to the Court of Chancery. You know what happens then." Crawton's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "And as for my aunt," the Duke said, "you may tell her, since I know she sent you, that the next letter she writes about Miss Ellsworth will be answered by my solicitor, not by me. She will find him less patient." Crawton left. The solicitor who had been waiting in the hallway went first, almost running. Crawton slower, turning at the door to look at me one last time with an expression that promised this was not over. But it was. I could see it in the slackness around his mouth. He had played his best card, and it had not been enough. The door closed. I exhaled. My hands were trembling, not with fear this time, but with the electric aftermath of standing in a fire and finding I had not burned. The Duke turned to me. He looked wrecked. The composure, the control, the careful architecture of a man who never let anyone see him shaken. All of it was gone. "I should have anticipated this," he said. "The impropriety. My aunt. I was so intent on doing what my mother would have wanted that I did not. You saved me. I may have made it worse. You did not." I stepped toward him, close, closer than I had ever deliberately stood. Close enough to see the rapid pulse at his throat and the fine lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of years of sleepless responsibility. "You gave me the only safe room I have had in 4 years. You gave me books and arguments and dinner and a garden to destroy. You gave me my mother's letters. You gave me—" My voice broke. I had not meant for it to break, but there it was. The crack in my own wall, the one I had been mortaring over since the night I arrived. "You gave me Edmund," I said. "And you can take back the house and the books and the garden, but you cannot take that back. I will not allow it.
His hand came up, slowly, as though he were reaching for something he expected to vanish. And his fingers brushed my jaw. Light as moth wings. I felt it everywhere. Eliza. His voice broke on my name. Actually broke, like a string drawn too tight. If I keep you here, if I ask you to stay, it must be as something more than a ward, more than a duty. And I do not know how to offer that, without it looking like another cage. I put my hand over his, held it where it was, against my face. His skin was warm, and his fingers were shaking. And the Duke of Ashworth, this man who commanded rooms and silenced merchants, and held an estate together by sheer will, was trembling because he was afraid I would say no. Then do not offer a cage, I said. Offer a door, and let me choose to walk through it. He kissed me, or I kissed him. It didn't matter who moved first, because the distance between us closed, like it had been waiting to close for weeks. And his mouth was on mine, and his hand was in my hair, and my back was against the edge of the library table, where Crawton's worthless documents still lay. And I felt the entire weight of every restrained dinner, every too long glance, every argument that was really about something else entirely. All of it came undone in a single, devastating, breathless moment. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. His breathing was ragged. My hands were fisted in his coat. "Marry me," he said. It was not poetic. It was not planned. It was the most graceless, desperate, honest proposal in the history of the peerage. And it was perfect. "Yes," I said. "Obviously, yes." The scandal was magnificent. A duke marrying his ward, a woman of no fortune, no family, no title, whose uncle had tried to sell her to a wool merchant. The gossip sheets feasted. Lady Ashworth descended upon the park 2 days after the announcement, with the force of a winter gale, and delivered a lecture on duty, legacy,
and bloodlines that lasted 45 minutes and contained the phrase, catastrophic lapse of judgment, no fewer than 6 times. Edmund sat through it without expression. When she finished, he said, "Thank you, Aunt. The wedding is in September. You are welcome to attend, or not, as you prefer." She made one more attempt, a letter to the bishop, requesting that the marriage be refused on grounds of moral unsuitability. The bishop, who had received his own letter from Edmund's solicitor, outlining Lady Ashworth's coordination with Crawton, and suggesting that the church might not wish to be associated with what amounted to the attempted sale of a young woman, declined to intervene. Lady Ashworth attended the wedding. She wore grey as though in mourning. She did not speak to me. I did not need her to. Crawton did not attempt to return. We learned later, through Edmund's man of business, that 2 of his creditors had indeed filed petitions. He left London for the north. I did not ask where. I did not care. There were other costs. Some doors in London closed. Certain hostesses declined to call. A prominent earl made a remark at his club that prompted Edmund to pay a quiet visit, the nature of which no one discussed afterward, but which resulted in the remark being retracted in writing. None of it touched us. Not really. Because the walls of Ashworth Park, which had once felt like a fortress built for one, had become something else entirely. A home that breathed and argued and filled up with firelight and books shelved in the correct order, and a garden that was, cautiously and stubbornly, beginning to bloom. 1 year later, on a morning in June, I found Edmund in the library. He was sitting at his mother's writing desk, the same desk where he had found the letters that brought me here. He had something in his hand. A letter, written on cream paper in a hand I knew as well as my own heartbeat. My mother's hand. "I missed one," he said. "It was tucked behind a drawer." A false panner. My mother must have hidden it intentionally. Perhaps she meant to keep this one for herself. He held it out to me. I took it, read it. It was my mother's last letter to his, written 3 weeks before she died. The letter must have reached Margaret before her own death, and she had tucked it away in the hidden compartment. The most precious of the collection, saved in the most secret place. "My dearest Margaret," she had written, "I have made a mess of things, I know that. But Eliza is the one clean, bright thing I leave behind. If there is any grace in this world, it will bring her to you. And if not to you, then to someone who sees what I see when I look at her. A woman who will not break, no matter how hard the world tries." I folded the letter carefully. I placed it in the box with the others. The box that sat on the desk in the library, wrapped in a ribbon that had faded from blue to silver in the sun. The same ribbon I had found on my first week here, tucked between 2 mishelved volumes of Montesquieu, as though the house itself had been waiting to give me something soft to hold. Edmund's hand found mine. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His thumb traced the inside of my wrist, over the pulse point, and I leaned against his shoulder and watched the morning light come through the library windows and thought, she was right. The grace found me. It just took the long way around. The empty vase on the morning room mantel, the one I had noticed on my first day, deliberately unfilled, held white roses now. I had planted them myself. They bloomed in June, and they would bloom again. And the absence that had once been the point had been quietly, irreversibly replaced by something living. Outside, the garden I had cut back to nothing was in full, reckless, unapologetic bloom.